What if the pain men do not talk about doesn't disappear, but gets passed down? Today, we're talking about how silence around emotional pain, especially in men, doesn't just affect one life. It could shape entire families for generations and generations. Today, this conversation explores how unspoken trauma is carried forward and why breaking that silence may be one of the most important things we can do for future generations. Willie Handler is here. He's the author of Out from the Shadows, and he studies the connection between stress, trauma, and health, including how patterns of silence, especially in men, can carry across generations. Willie, it's great to have you back.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And I can't believe we're on the last episode of the series already.
Episode 6. Yeah, and this is an important conversation. And I feel like we left a powerful episode for the last one.
Oh, I agree. I agree. All right.
Yeah. So, why do you think men historically have been conditioned to avoid talking about pain or emotional struggle?
Well, I think men tend to avoid showing vulnerability, and that it's a sign of weakness. And I don't totally understand it. Maybe it's partly genetics. Maybe, it's goes back to caveman time. I don't really know. But seriously, men don't like to show that they're weak and vulnerable, and certainly not to each other.
No,
And I think, uh, and at times, I think it's to their own detriment. And I don't believe they recognize that it's not a good thing to do.
absolutely. Absolutely. And so, you have studied the connection between generational trauma and the Holocaust because you were raised by a family who was greatly affected by that. In fact, you wrote a book on it. And so, in your research, what did you find when it comes to suppressed emotions and generational trauma?
And here's the interesting thing. I even had problems getting men to talk to me. So
Wow.
that right off the bat. So I can tell you um, that I interviewed 106 people
Mhm.
for this book, and it was about 20% men. And so, it's even a small sample size. But irrespective of whether I'm speaking to men or women, the same kind of issues arose with irrespective of the gender. And
Right.
that is um, that all these people I spoke to, in many cases, their parents did not speak about the traumatic events that they experienced during the Holocaust. And as a result, they themselves inherited a big, a big chunk of that trauma. And I spoke to people about it, and they told me about it. And to show you um, how prevalent it is, a couple people, when I interviewed them, I'm lucky they actually came forward to be interviewed, specifically said they had never told their story to anyone before until they spoke to me. So some 65-year-old has been carrying this around their entire life. And that's not healthy. So when we spoke about the next generation, their children, because most Holocaust survivors' children are now between 60 and 79 or something like that. And they're a little, there's no one above that because they would be actually Holocaust survivors. Not,
Right.
but there are there were a small number that are a little bit younger, um, and and in fact, when they spoke about their children, you could see that there were signs of it as well. Because, and I will talk about the difference between the two generations, the children and the grandchildren, because some of the people I interviewed were not children but grandchildren, so the next generation, and that was probably about, you know, again, 20 between 20 and 25% were the next generation. And yeah, there was clearly very visible signs based on their responses that they had experienced trauma as well because their parents avoided the subject too, just as their grandparents had. But there was a significant difference, partly because we're talking about millennials and and baby boomers and they're sort of their whole life philosophies tends to be different. And so what I saw was that many of the children did not only did they didn't know much about their family history until after their parents died and they actually started doing some research, which I'm no different. I was the same. But by then they'd already passed on um, their trauma, at least genetically. And then the other phenomenon I found was as people were doing the research, and anybody who has trauma and does Holocaust research, that only exacerbates your symptoms. It makes it worse. And so that's another thing that I found. But what I did notice with the grandchildren, the third generation, was that they weren't at all reluctant to ask questions, that speak openly about their parents and their grandparents and their own personal experiences. They were very, very open. And most of them told me that they had plans to make sure that their next generation, their children, the fourth generation, would they would create an environment where this was more in the open, and they would talk about it at an age appropriate level as the child was growing up. And I can tell you that I've done the same thing with my grandchildren. And just 3 weeks ago, I took my 9-year-old grandson to a Holocaust museum because I want him to openly talk about what happened and avoid the silence that really negatively impacts on you.
Absolutely. I think the only
I just
way,
said there was a lot there that I just covered, but if
yeah, no, there's a lot. And what I know for my own personal experience with trauma is that the only way to handle it or to work through it is by bringing it up and talking about it. And I feel like, I don't know if you can relate, but that's the hardest part. And once you've exposed it and acknowledged it, then you can start healing from it. And so
right,
trauma can be passed down to generations because no one talks about it. People are ashamed of it. People feel like it's too painful. But the only way to make a difference in the generations to come is by acknowledging it and changing the narrative. So that must have been so difficult to work through.
yeah, it was not an easy process. The book that I wrote based on these interviews is is more or less complete. I like on a third or fourth draft, just waiting for my agent to appear with an interest publisher. But I think some of it might even be, I would say, a little bit groundbreaking. And because nobody's done most of the studies I've seen are clinical ones, and I'm not a clinician. So I took a very different approach, and it's like more, I would say, um, it's sort of like a more family history
Mhm.
and how family trauma impacts on the different members from generation to generation. And the end of the book, I talk about specifically, I talk about this topic is how to sort of break the cycle
Mhm.
and stop it. We're talking about for Holocaust survivors, fourth generation, but the book applies to anybody who has trauma in their family, and which is
Mhm.
lots of people.
Mhm.
And I've gone even one step further, which is I noted it in my in Toronto where I live, it has probably the second largest community of children of Holocaust survivors in North America. And
Wow.
there is no support group for these people. So guess what I did?
Did you create one?
I created a support group which is going to be up and running in about a month or so. I just nailed it down. I got therapists to volunteer their time to help facilitate. I got a venue and in the next few days I'm going to start promoting it. So we'll see how many men show up. But
Hmm.
I think I'm going to really kind of push in my promos that if you're a man, uh, it's time to come out and talk about it.
Yeah. Because emotional shutdown in men can affect relationships and family dynamics on such a deep level. Like it's actually a really big issue. Because if a man is shut down, um, the whole family can feel that tension. Like
Yeah.
I know we've all experienced being around someone that was silent, but you could feel the intensity of their energy because something was bothering them. They don't have to say anything. And so that can really affect the family dynamic. And so starting to open up and talk about these things is so healing for not only families, but for the world as a collective to come together and have that support system. I don't know. Why do you think men are so uncomfortable or feel unsafe when opening up?
They think it's a sign of weakness, right?
Hmm.
And every guy wants to portray an image of being strong. But I can tell you that most people I run into tell me I can't believe how much vulnerability you exhibit, but on the same time, how strong you are and how resilient you are. So they're not mutually exclusive. And in fact, it takes a lot of strength and courage to talk about it. It's much easier to stay silent.
Yeah, that's a really good point. What is the hidden
And
cost of that, though?
I feel more empowered and stronger about addressing my trauma.
Mm,
I would say I'm a different person than I was 5 years ago.
absolutely, for sure. So, when you were silent and when you weren't speaking about your trauma, how did that affect you physically, emotionally, and your relationships?
Well, I can tell you that my wife, um, specifically after, not during, but after, she was sort of when she saw the changes in me, they were quite noticeable. And she then started complaining that, oh, for decades you were like you seem so distant.
Hmm.
And I didn't even realize that was the case. But yeah, probably was. And I would say that most people I interacted with, oh, he's a friendly guy and chatty, but you can't get close to him.
Right.
So yeah, to go through this process, not is it only powerful and empowering, but it's going to change you for the better. That being in touch with your feelings is not a bad thing. I think the during the transition, you have to learn how to cope with them because it's
Mhm.
kind of easy to bury your emotions and be stoic. There's no benefit to being stoic. Maybe in a moment of crisis, it's good to be show some strength and leadership. But in the end, in the long run, people don't connect with those kind of people.
Mhm.
And so, if you're in a leadership role and you show a little bit of vulnerability along with your strength, people will connect with you. And that's exactly what I've been personally experiencing. How many people have reached out to me specifically because I've shown some vulnerability.
Right.
It's all good.
What was the thing that made you finally look your trauma in the eye? Like, was there something that happened, or when did you finally decide, okay, it's time? Because many people hold on to like people that have survived the Holocaust or the war or been through serious traumas. They often shut down and don't often start talking about it. So what shifted in your life that made you say, okay, this is time?
Well, when my wife urged me to write my family story, and I sort of built it into a memoir. And exactly what I was talking about is as I started doing the research. Well, that just exacerbated my generational trauma. And I literally was starting to come unglued.
Mhm.
And I thought, I'm not feeling right, and I need to do something. So I reached out and I decided to try therapy. And that's not easy. And again, one of the things I want to say is therapy isn't the only way to open up, but it's a very effective way to do so in a safe environment. If you've got support groups or whatever, or if you have groups where you can be open and things like that, that's great. But therapy is a safe place to talk about things where you might not want to share with other people. So, it's one of a number of options you have to start opening up. Maybe you just open up with your family and your spouse and your children or whatever, or your siblings, and start discussions about, you know, issues within your family and why people behave the way they do.
Absolutely. It's a great place to start. And so you jumped into therapy, and what was the process like for you? Um, I guess what I want people out there to relate to is what is realistic when it comes to starting to open up? Like what was the process like and how long before you started to feel better?
Huh. Okay. I mean, I had never been to therapy. Did I have preconceived notions? Yes, to a certain extent. I thought, "Ooh, I'll try this for, I don't know, 8, 12 weeks, and then I'll be cured."
Right.
Oh yeah. And that did not happen.
Right.
First thing, there's no cure for trauma. Um, it's a it's something that's inside of you for good, but you have to learn how to manage it and control. So it doesn't control you, you control it. And so I I can go through the whole process. Initially, after a few weeks, the therapist, she started complaining to me that I was talking about all kinds of people, but I never talked about myself. And because I never have. And so she started prodding me to talk about myself, and it was really painful and really difficult. If you've never done that, something like that, you just can't open up. And as I started opening up more, I remember I remember one session, I basically cried through the whole thing. I was
Wow.
just like, wow, everything came out. And then I kind of felt better after. But I remember complaining to her and blaming her because I felt worse than when I started. Because because the process is difficult to do. And so I would say 6 months into the process, and I was seeing her weekly, sometimes twice a week even, and when I was really struggling. But I would say after about 6 months, I started having a better understanding of who I was um, and what was and how traumatized I was. I had no clue. I really had no clue. A year in, and I was clearly much better and able to do the work on the next book without coming unglued again.
Right. Right.
And so, yeah, and I'm because of the kind of work I do and talking about trauma so much and being exposed to all the anti-Semitism that's in the world, I'm still doing therapy. But I did change therapists this year in order to just change the focus because they're not all the same.
Mm.
And not I and I absolutely loved my first therapist. She was an angel, and whenever I spent on her was worth every dollar.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for being so vulnerable and for sharing your story. Um, why now? Why is this conversation important, more important now than ever?
Um, well, I know for instance, in America, we're both Canadian, right? But in
Yeah.
America, they've been through some major wars. And um, and let's start with World War II because, and World War II, the Korean War, Vietnam War, Afghanistan, Iraq, and veterans, and soldiers come back traumatized because you're seeing horrible things, and um, and so it's always happening. We're traumatizing more people through war, but in other things as well. We have a stream of refugees coming in because there's certain parts of the world that are unsettled. They're all traumatized. And so what we have, the population the global population as a whole, there are a lot of traumatized people walking around and and in many cultures, you just don't talk about those kind of things. So it's very important today to start reaching out and getting the message out is you're doing you're you're um you're doing it the wrong way. And that trying to be a stoic and living in silence about things that affect you are not only harming you, they're going to harm your children. They're going to have an impact on your spouse. And so people have to learn and this is no different than other kinds of sort of innovations, so to speak, or whatever. There was a time where people didn't talk about mental health at all. And now, people are much more opening up, but it's more women than men. And generational trauma is a mental health condition. Um, I'm not sure if it's I'm not sure if it's in um, the coding manual or whatever, how officially it is, but it's recognized, and I think that the time has come to really um, we've known about trauma since the 60s from the Vietnam War, and it's really time to um, tackle this issue because it's just making everyone more and more sick and with each generation because it's just spreading that way.
Mm. Yeah, it not only affects your children, but affects your children's children and your children's children's children if these patterns don't change. And so
Really. Yeah.
if we could do something about it, then why wouldn't we, right?
My daughter's a lost cause. She's a mess, but her kids will not be because I take it upon myself to make sure that there are healthy, open discussions about the family trauma and so that they understand and they will learn to recognize the impacts on themselves and address them.
So if a man is listening and he realizes that his silence may be affecting his children and his family, what would you want to say to him?
Um, don't just start by talking to your family and asking them how they feel and how they perceive you, and and have an open discussion without being defensive, and figure out what you can do to strengthen your relations. And we're not just talking about family. We're talking about all your relationships. Your workplace relationships will only improve. Um, and I bet these men get triggered by all kinds of things and just keep it all in and make it just worse and worse. I know exactly the kind of things that triggers me, and they always did. And I just kind of buried it. I just buried it all with all the trauma I already had. And instead, now if I get triggered, I go, I come into my therapist's office and she says, "How was your week?" And I go, "Oh, well, this and this happened." And, and then she said, and then she'll ask, "Well, how did you deal with it?" And I will tell her. And that, and and how I deal with it is something that I have to learn. It wasn't, it's not intuitive. And I think I've done a great job, and that's why I do this podcast. I wrote the book. I'm doing I'm having a support. I'm starting a support group because I want to pass on what I've learned to others, and and hopefully, as a man, maybe men will listen to me and consider what I have to say and how and maybe relate to what I have to say as well.
But if anyone out there is listening and they want to get in touch with you, what is the best way to get in touch with you or to see more
Uh,
of your work?
okay, I have a website. It's not hard to find because it's williehandler.com. And I write extensively on Substack, all kinds of articles, many, some related to trauma, but other topics as well. And you can find me there by looking for Willie Handler, uh, and um, and subscribe to my newsletter because in the newsletter I talk about presentations that I might be doing in your community. For instance, next month I'm going to be in New York. And later in the year, I'm going to be in Philadelphia. So, I do some public speaking, um, as well as speaking virtually, and then information about my books that are coming out and things like that. So, if people subscribe to my Substack account, you can keep track of all those things just through my newsletter. And of course, if you go to Amazon, the largest bookseller in the world, you'll find my memoir, which is loaded with stuff about trauma, and because that's what my family story is about, and so that's kind of like that's like almost like a precursor to the book I have specifically about trauma, which that title is called The Hidden Victims, but my memoir is called Oh, I Can See It Right Behind You, Out from the Shadows.
Mhm.
Thank you. Is that like product placement?
It is product placement. Yes, the eye right behind my shoulder.
Okay, and so
What
I think I covered it all. So yeah, and um, there's all kinds of podcasts and interviews on my website too. And so,
absolutely.
and there's a contact page. People have contacted me and things like that. Women that propose marriage. I'm already married. She's laughing, but
Darn,
women have
darn.
proposed marriage. Women have, men, if you show your vulnerability, women will just chase after you.
It's true. It's 100% true. Thank you so much for showing up today and being so vulnerable. As you said, I will not propose to you today, but maybe if
Thank
you
you,
come back, I
Lisa.
will. It was so good to see you. Do you have any last minute things you want to share?
Um, yes, there is. I, I think I think it's time to break free from your father's emotional silence because I'm not talking to guys, I'm not talking to necessarily the veterans, but children of war veterans. So it's time to break free from your father's emotional silence and just open up and be a stronger and better person.
I agree 100%. Thank you, Willie, and thank you to our audience for tuning in. This conversation isn't just about the past, it's about what we carry forward. So, again, Willie, thanks for shedding the light on something that affects so many people, often without them even realizing it. That's the most important part, I think, that I'm taking away from today's conversation is that sometimes we don't even know why we feel the way that we do until we start diving into our emotions and our feelings and our history and our family's history. So, thank you so much for breaking the silence today. And to any of you out there, we will have Willie's information in the show notes so you can have easy access to him and his stuff. And if you're a woman out there, you may even just get to propose to him.
Oh, no, 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 no,
Until
no, no,
next
no,
time,
no, no,
take care,
no
everybody.
proposals.